The restaurant was alive with noise, a Friday night symphony of clinking glasses, sizzling plates, and conversations weaving together into a low hum. The glow of hanging lamps spilled golden light across polished wood tables, giving the place a warm, inviting feel. Waiters darted through the aisles with practiced speed, balancing trays heavy with food, smiling tightly as they delivered meals and drinks to eager customers. Every table seemed full, families with children laughing over burgers, couples leaning close with shared bottles of wine, groups of friends talking loudly enough to compete with the music playing faintly in the background. In the corner booth, away from most of the chatter, sat a man who was impossible to overlook. His presence was a gravity of its own, pulling glances whether people wanted to look or not. He was enormous, built like a mountain in a fitted jacket that strained at the seams around his shoulders. His bald head caught the soft light above, his expression calm but unreadable, a giant who seemed comfortable in stillness. He didn't shift or fidget. He just sat, occupying the space with such ease that it felt like the booth had been designed for him alone. Some diners recognized him immediately, whispers trailing like smoke across tables. Others simply stared, drawn to the sheer size of the man, wondering who he was and why he looked so at home in a place buzzing with smaller lives. He had a quiet, grounded presence, the kind that made people straighten without thinking when they passed too close to his table. At the service station near the kitchen, a young man named Alex tied his apron tighter, sighing with irritation as he scanned his assigned tables. He had only been waiting tables for a few months, and already he felt the job was beneath him. To him, every order was a demand, every customer a critic waiting to pounce. He had ambition beyond these walls, or so he told himself. Nights like this only fueled his impatience. When his eyes landed on the corner booth, his lips curled into a smirk. "Table 12 again," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head. "That guy eats like he's competing with the kitchen." He didn't notice, or didn't care, that his voice carried just enough for two other waiters to glance at him in warning. They didn't respond, but their faces told the story. Don't. Alex, however, wasn't one to keep thoughts to himself. He grabbed a notepad, tossed it in his hand like he was about to write a punchline rather than an order, and walked across the floor with forced swagger. His shoes clicked against the tiles, his steps quick, too confident for someone approaching a man whose shadow alone seemed larger than him. When he reached the booth, the giant man looked up. His eyes were calm, steady, a dark weight that didn't blink too quickly. Alex felt a shiver he refused to acknowledge, and so he plastered on a casual grin, pen poised. "What'll it be tonight?" Alex asked, voice just loud enough to carry to the nearby tables. The man's deep baritone rolled out slow, steady, polite. "I'll take the ribeye. Medium. 2 sides of mac and cheese. A Caesar salad. And keep the water coming." Alex arched his brows, scribbling quickly, but the smirk tugged at his lips again. "That's a lot," he said, raising his voice just enough so the next table could hear. "Guess you're planning to roll out of here, huh?" The words landed heavier than he expected, a short silence pressing around the booth as a couple of diners turned their heads. A man at the next table chuckled into his napkin. Someone else snickered behind their hand. The giant man didn't move. He didn't laugh or frown. He simply let the words hang there, his gaze fixed on Alex, deep and unflinching. Then, without a change in expression, he gave a single nod. "That'll do." Alex shifted, uncomfortable with how little reaction he'd gotten. He scribbled the last note and spun away, leaving behind a faint ripple of whispers. As he walked toward the kitchen, a few patrons exchanged glances. Some looked amused, others uneasy. The other servers moved quickly past him, giving him space but not acknowledgement, as though refusing to be associated with what had just happened. Behind the kitchen doors, Alex leaned against the counter, rolling his eyes as he shouted the order to the cooks. "Man's ordering like he's got a bottomless stomach. Ribeye 2 max salad. Guess we'll see if he leaves anything standing." One of the senior waitresses shot him a sharp look. "Alex, shut it. That's not just any customer." "Yeah, well, maybe he should think about that before eating like a demolition crew," Alex quipped, ignoring her. He grabbed a tray of drinks for another table and strutted back into the dining area, keeping his chin high. Meanwhile, the giant in the corner booth tapped a slow rhythm on the table with his thick fingers. Each sound was deep, like a muffled drumbeat, steady and deliberate. His gaze wandered the room, calm but observant. The laughter that had come at his expense still floated faintly, even as the conversations returned to their usual hum. He didn't shift in anger. He didn't scowl. But the air around him felt different now, the warmth of the restaurant dulled by an undertone of something sharper. A few diners nearby sensed it too. They stole quick looks his way, curiosity mixing with discomfort. They could feel that something had shifted. Alex returned not long after, dropping off drinks for the table next to the booth. He leaned down, muttering just loud enough for them to hear. Bet he's gonna order dessert too. Hope they've got a forklift in the back. The couple chuckled nervously, glancing toward the corner. The giant man's eyes flicked toward Alex, slow, deliberate, and the young waiter felt the gaze like a weight pressing against his chest. But once again, no words came. Just that steady, unyielding look before turning back to his glass of water. Alex straightened, his smirk faltering for the first time. He stepped away quickly, though he tried to hide the speed in his stride. He didn't notice how the room had started to change, how the whispers weren't laughter now, but speculation. Guests leaned close to one another, murmuring about the man in the booth and the reckless waiter who kept prodding at him. The giant lifted his fork when his food arrived, cutting into the steak with precision. He ate slowly, without rush, each bite deliberate. Yet every so often, his gaze would lift, landing briefly on Alex before returning to his meal. It wasn't hostility, but it wasn't indifference either. It was something heavier, something waiting. The night carried on, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses flowing again, but the undercurrent of tension never left. The other waiters moved quickly, eyes flicking between Alex and the corner booth. They knew what Alex didn't. No one spoke to the man in the corner that way. No one. And as the laughter from a nearby table echoed one more time at Alex's words, the giant's fork paused midair, held still for a beat too long before lowering slowly back to the plate. P-style next? The dining room had settled into its rhythm again, waiters weaving through aisles with trays balanced like circus acts, couples leaning across tables in soft conversation, and children laughing over shared desserts. Yet underneath that steady hum of life, there was a quiet tension growing. It wasn't loud, not yet, but it was present, like a note off-key in a familiar song. Every time Alex approached the corner booth, that note rang louder. He strutted with a tray in hand, convinced the earlier laughs from a couple of guests meant his jokes were landing. Confidence puffed him up, making his voice louder than it needed to be, his grin sharper than it should have been. He leaned in to set down the steak and sides in front of the giant, making a show of it. "Careful with this one," he muttered with an exaggerated grunt. "Don't want to throw out my back carrying all this." The words didn't drop quietly. They cut across the table like a knife, catching the ears of the couple beside the booth. The man smirked faintly, though his wife glanced at her plate, embarrassed on his behalf. The giant in the booth didn't move. His expression didn't crack. He simply picked up the fork, steady as stone, and began to eat. Alex lingered longer than necessary, his pen tapping against his notepad as though daring a reaction. But none came. Just the sound of the fork pressing against the plate, a steady scrape and clink, unhurried, patient. He left with a shrug, muttering just loud enough as he passed a busboy. "Guess he's saving room for dessert. Gonna need a wheelbarrow." The busboy's head jerked up, eyes wide, but he didn't answer. He just glanced nervously at the booth, then scurried back to the kitchen as if carrying a secret. Minutes passed, plates clattered, orders flew from kitchen to floor. The restaurant roared in its Friday night fullness, but the corner carried its own energy now, the kind that made diners lean closer to one another, whispering low. They weren't just watching for food anymore, they were watching for what might happen next. When Alex returned to refill the water glass, he let the silence stretch before speaking. "You know, sir," he said with mock politeness, his words coated in sugar but dripping sarcasm underneath. "We do have smaller plates. Might make things easier for you. Less heavy lifting. His grin widened when he caught a chuckle from two men seated nearby. The laughter wasn't loud, but it was enough. The fork paused midair. The giant's head lifted, his eyes narrowing just slightly, not in anger but in focus. He set the fork down carefully, with the weight of someone controlling the strength in their hands. Then he leaned back, water glass in hand, his gaze fixed on Alex. It wasn't sharp or loud, but it was steady, the kind of look that stripped away all the layers someone wore to shield themselves. For the first time, Alex faltered. The smirk wavered before he forced it back. He cleared his throat, backing away faster than he meant to, muttering something about checking on other tables. The diners closest to the booth exchanged glances. The moment had been small, subtle, but undeniable. Everyone felt the shift, the balance tilting, something waking that had been sitting patiently in the corner all night. In the kitchen, Alex leaned against the counter, shaking his head. Man just stares at me like he's trying to burn holes. Guess he can't take a joke. Alex, the older waitress snapped quietly, her voice urgent. Do yourself a favor and stop. That man. But Alex waved her off, rolling his eyes. What, he's gonna throw me out? Please. If I owned this place, guys like that wouldn't even get through the door. Costs too much to feed one man. His words carried further than he thought. A couple of servers at the sink froze, their eyes darting toward the swinging kitchen door as though afraid someone might have heard. And someone had. Out in the dining room, the laughter had gone quiet. The atmosphere tightened, the same way air feels just before a storm rolls in. The giant set his fork down again, his hand resting against the edge of the table. His gaze didn't move, but it didn't have to. People felt it. Alex returned, wiping his hands on his apron, and approached the booth again, a grin plastered on his face to mask the unease creeping up his spine. Need anything else? Maybe another side of mac? Or 3? We'll have to restock the pantry after this table's done. The couple in the next booth stiffened. The man chuckled nervously, but his wife's hand touched his arm, warning. Across the room, a family went silent, eyes flicking from the waiter to the towering man sitting still as stone. This time, the response came. The fork was lowered slowly, carefully, placed against the plate as though it were an object of ceremony. The giant leaned forward, the leather of the booth creaking under his weight. His voice came low, a rumble that cut through the air without effort. Enough. It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. The word carried power, a weight that pressed against the chest of everyone who heard it. The hum of conversation faltered across the dining room, thinning into a hush. Alex blinked, startled. But the giant didn't move further. He just leaned back again, eyes still locked on Alex, steady and unyielding. The silence that followed was thicker than the words themselves, a silence that belonged to someone who had no need to shout to be heard. Alex stumbled over his words, chuckling awkwardly, as though he could sweep the moment away with another joke. Just kidding, of course. Enjoy the meal. He turned quickly, walking faster than he wanted, tray clutched tight in his hands. The eyes of the diners followed him, then drifted back to the booth. Whispers grew, soft but insistent, like the murmur of waves against rocks. The tension had snapped into something sharper now, and it wasn't just between the man and the waiter anymore. It was in the room itself, carried by every person who had witnessed the exchange. At a table near the bar, a man muttered, "Does he know who that is?" His companion shook her head, eyes wide. If he did, he wouldn't be running his mouth. The kitchen door swung closed behind Alex, and he let out a long breath, trying to shake the weight of that single word. He told himself it didn't matter, that he was in control, that the laughter from the diners proved he was winning. But somewhere deep in his chest, the word enough echoed, heavy and immovable. Back in the booth, the giant returned to his steak, cutting slowly, chewing with measured calm. But every so often, his eyes lifted, following the waiter across the floor, patient, steady, waiting. And the diners waited too. They leaned close, whispers darting from table to table, the air charged with anticipation. Everyone knew the line had been crossed, though only one man seemed unaware of just how far. The evening wore on, plates emptied, drinks refilled, laughter forced but brittle. And then Alex, flushed with false courage, leaned too far once more. As he passed near the booth, he laughed loudly to another server, his words sharp and careless. "If I owned this place, I'd ban guys like him. Place would save a fortune." The words weren't just overheard. They landed square in the middle of the restaurant, carried by his volume, hanging there like a slap across the face of silence itself. Forks froze. Glasses hovered midair. The hum of the dining room collapsed into stunned quiet. The giant's hand lowered his fork, deliberate as a hammer descending. He turned slowly, eyes locking on Alex with a force that made the young man freeze where he stood. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. The same detailed 1,000-word style? The silence that followed was heavy, thicker than the air had been all night. Conversations had stopped mid-sentence. Laughter had cut off mid-breath. The restaurant wasn't buzzing anymore. It was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen. Even the clatter of dishes from the kitchen seemed to have stilled, as though the sound itself knew it wasn't welcome in that moment. The giant's eyes fixed on Alex, unblinking, steady. It wasn't anger in them, not the kind Alex had seen before in customers who complained. It wasn't the heat of a man offended. It was colder, quieter, something rooted deeper than temper. It was the kind of gaze that said he'd been patient, and that patience had just run its course. Alex froze where he stood, caught in the stare, his grin faltering. He tried to recover, clearing his throat, pretending to adjust his apron as though he hadn't just spoken loudly enough for the entire restaurant to hear. His cheeks burned as the silence stretched, his ears straining under the weight of all the eyes pressing on him. Then, finally, the giant moved. He shifted in his booth, the leather groaning under his weight as he pushed himself upright. The simple act of standing seemed monumental. He kept rising, higher and higher, until Alex, who was tall by ordinary standards, felt himself shrink 2 sizes smaller in comparison. The giant towered over him, his shadow swallowing Alex whole. His voice, when it came, was slow, deliberate, and resonant enough to reach every corner of the restaurant without the need to shout. "Funny thing, kid," he said, the deep baritone rolling like distant thunder. "You don't own this place." The words hung in the air, a statement so simple yet carrying a weight that made Alex's throat close. The giant reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a black leather folder. His massive hand laid it flat on the table, flipping it open with a precision that contrasted with the size of his fingers. The golden embossed letters caught the light, the restaurant's name gleaming on the page. Ownership papers, crisp and undeniable, stared up at Alex and anyone close enough to see. Gasps rippled across the dining room. Whispers sparked like fire jumping from table to table. A man at the bar leaned forward, muttering under his breath. "I knew it! I knew it was him!" Alex's mouth fell open, his pen dropping from his hand onto the floor. He bent to grab it, but his fingers fumbled clumsily, slick with sudden sweat. His voice, when it came, was thin and cracking. You own this place?" The giant's eyes didn't waver. He nodded once, firm and final. "I built this place. For people to come and feel welcome. Doesn't matter if they're rich or poor. Doesn't matter if they're tall, short, big, small. Doesn't matter what they eat or how much they eat. Everyone deserves respect when they walk through those doors." The words struck like blows, heavy and measured, each one echoing in the still air. The diners leaned forward, captivated. They weren't just witnesses now, they were participants in something bigger, something that felt like a lesson unfolding in real time. The giant's voice dropped lower, his tone sharpening with precision. "But you thought making a man the butt of your joke would make you clever. You thought laughter bought at someone else's expense would make you bigger. It doesn't. It makes you small." Alex's lips parted, searching for words that wouldn't come. His chest rose and fell too quickly, his breath shallow, panic creeping into his features. He could feel the eyes of everyone on him, not with amusement anymore, but with judgment. He was no longer the entertainer, the clever waiter tossing lines for cheap laughs. He was the fool caught in his own act. The murmurs grew louder, people nodding, some whispering agreement. A woman near the back clapped once, a sharp sound in the silence, and others followed tentatively, then with growing strength. It wasn't applause for a show, it was applause for justice. Alex's throat bowed as he swallowed hard. I didn't mean. The giant raised one hand, silencing him instantly. His palm was broad, steady, the motion slow but absolute. Words mean something, whether you mean them or not. They tell people who you are. And tonight you told everyone here exactly who you are. The heat of shame crept up Alex's neck, flooding his face. He wanted to shrink into himself, to vanish into the floor, to hide behind the swinging kitchen doors and never come back out. But the restaurant wasn't letting him hide. Every set of eyes pinned him in place, as if daring him to run. The giant leaned closer, his shadow stretching over Alex again. I don't raise my voice because I don't need to. Respect isn't demanded, it's lived. And tonight you've shown none of it. Alex's lips trembled. His thoughts scrambled desperately, searching for something, anything, to undo what he had done. He opened his mouth again, but no excuse, no witty line, no apology seemed enough to fill the chasm that had opened between him and the man standing before him. The diner's whispers surged again, louder now, an undercurrent of voices united in disbelief at the audacity Alex had shown, and in awe at the calm strength with which the giant revealed himself. People weren't looking at Alex anymore, they were looking at the owner, with respect blooming in their eyes. The giant finally leaned back, his presence still filling the room even as he sat. He gestured once to the papers on the table, then folded them back into the leather case, sliding it into his jacket. He didn't need to prove anything more. The truth was already written in every heart in the room. Alex stumbled backward a step, his voice small. I didn't know. The giant's eyes softened slightly, though his voice remained steady. That's the problem. You didn't care to know. You thought the man at the table was just a joke waiting for a punchline. Maybe next time you'll look closer before you speak. The room remained hushed, but the silence now was charged, alive with the weight of what had been revealed. The tension wasn't about what had been said anymore, but about what would happen next. Alex's hands twisted in his apron, his breathing uneven. His coworkers stood frozen near the kitchen doors, watching with wide eyes, unwilling to intervene. The manager, who had been quietly observing from behind the bar, stepped forward slightly, but stopped short, sensing that this wasn't his moment to control. The giant leaned back in his booth, reclaiming his fork, the act deliberate and unhurried. He cut another piece of steak, as though to show he was done speaking for now. The pause that followed was heavier than any shout could have been, leaving the young waiter dangling in uncertainty. Alex swallowed hard, his chest tight. The truth had been laid bare, and there was no running from it. Every diner, every server, every set of eyes in that restaurant was waiting, hanging in the balance of what would happen next. The hush lingered like a heavy curtain over the room, every person in the restaurant suspended in the moment. Forks lay untouched on plates, glasses hovered in midair, and the sound of music from the overhead speakers seemed far away, as though even the speakers knew better than to intrude. Alex stood rooted in place, apron strings twisted between trembling fingers, his eyes darting from table to table, looking for support that wasn't there. Every diner who had once laughed at his jokes now looked away, ashamed for having joined him, or stared openly at him with judgment in their gaze. The applause from moments earlier had not been for him, and he could feel it, could feel the sting of humiliation searing his skin. The giant finished chewing his bite of steak with deliberate calm, placed his fork gently on the plate, and dabbed the corner of his mouth with the napkin. He moved slowly, as though every action carried its own significance. Then he looked up, his gaze locking on Alex with the same weight it had carried all night. His voice, low and steady, carried easily to every ear in the room. "Take off the apron." The words struck like a hammer against glass. A ripple spread through the restaurant, diners sitting straighter, eyes widening, whispers rising. Alex blinked, his mouth parting as though he had misheard. "What?" His voice cracked, small and desperate. "You don't represent this place anymore," the giant said, each word cutting clean and final. "Not with that attitude. Not with that disrespect." The color drained from Alex's face, his knees weakening. "Please, sir, I was joking. I didn't mean." But the giant lifted one hand, silencing him without effort. "A joke lifts people up, not tears them down. What you did tonight wasn't humor. It was cruelty disguised as wit. And this restaurant wasn't built on cruelty. It was built on respect." The manager stepped forward now, his face pale but resolute. He looked at Alex, then back to the owner, and nodded once. "You heard him," the manager said, his voice tight. "Take it off. You're done." A murmur ran through the crowd of diners, some whispering in satisfaction, others in awe. A couple of regulars nodded firmly, as though they had been waiting for this very moment, knowing the owner well enough to understand how important his values were. Alex's hands shook as he fumbled with the apron strings, tugging them loose. His breath hitched as he pulled the cloth over his head, clutching it in his hands as though it were his last shield. His eyes burned, not just from shame but from the crushing weight of realizing he had destroyed his own place here with words he thought were harmless. He opened his mouth again, his voice cracking. "Sir, please, I need this job. I'll do better, I swear." The giant leaned forward slightly, his eyes softer now but still unyielding. "You needed to think before you spoke. You needed to see people as people, not targets. Respect is free, but you chose to throw it away. That's not a lesson you learned by keeping the apron on." Alex's shoulders slumped, the fight drained from him. The diners stared as he backed away, apron hanging from his hand, his face red and eyes glassy. He looked small, fragile, the swagger stripped from him completely. The path to the kitchen seemed longer than it ever had before, every step echoing like a drumbeat of failure. As he disappeared behind the swinging doors, the silence in the room broke into a swell of sound, applause, not scattered this time, but rolling, full and strong. Diners clapped, some even whistled, their faces alive with admiration. It wasn't just for the justice of the moment. It was for the man who had stood tall without raising his voice, for the owner who reminded them that kindness was the foundation beneath the walls they sat in. The giant raised a hand, a simple gesture, and the applause softened into a hum of warm approval. He leaned back in his booth, the tension finally dissipating, his presence once again calm and steady. Another server, nervous but determined, stepped forward to take Alex's place. Her hands trembled slightly as she held her notepad, but her smile was genuine, her respect palpable. The giant looked up at her, his gaze softening, his deep voice gentler than before. "Don't worry," he said. "You're doing fine. Just bring me dessert. And make it two." He paused, his lips curving into the faintest of smiles. "One for you too." A ripple of laughter spread through the room, not sharp, not mocking, but warm and genuine, the kind of laughter that stitched people together instead of cutting them apart. The server blinked, startled, then smiled wide, nodding quickly before hurrying toward the kitchen. The diners returned to their meals, but the energy in the room had shifted. It wasn't the same buzzing hum as before. It was brighter, lighter, charged with the memory of what they had witnessed. Strangers exchanged smiles across tables, families leaned closer, couples clasped hands. The story of the night was no longer the food or the music or the bustle of Friday. It was the quiet strength of a man who valued respect above everything. The giant finished his meal slowly, savoring each bite, unbothered by the stares that still flicked his way from time to time. He didn't mind. He had no need to hide who he was, no need to prove himself further. He had spoken, he had acted, and that was enough. When the dessert arrived, 2 plates were set down, one before him and one before the nervous server. She hesitated, looking around as though she might be breaking some unspoken rule. But the giant gave her a nod, his deep voice reassuring. "Sit. Eat. You've earned it." Her face lit up as she slipped into the seat across from him for a moment, taking a bite of the cake. The diners watched, smiling, touched by the simplicity of the act. A small kindness, but powerful in its symbolism. Where cruelty had tried to take root, generosity had bloomed instead. The night wound down, guests paying their checks, gathering coats, and leaving with stories already forming on their tongues. They knew they would tell this night again and again, to friends, to coworkers, to family. The story of the waiter who mocked the wrong man, and the owner who didn't need to shout to command respect. As the last tables cleared, the giant rose from his booth, his towering figure once again drawing every eye. He placed a generous tip on the table, more than enough to make up for the chaos of the night, then turned toward the door. His steps were slow, steady, unhurried, the kind of walk belonging to a man who carried nothing to prove. The staff stood in silence as he passed, their eyes wide, their respect clear in their faces. He nodded once to them, a gesture of acknowledgement, before stepping out into the cool night air. Inside, the restaurant exhaled, the tension gone, replaced with the memory of a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. And as the doors swung shut behind him, the last whispers lingered among the diners. The waiter had thought he was mocking a customer, but instead, he had revealed the true weight of character, the kind that couldn't be measured on a plate, but only in how a man carried himself when tested.